Hi folks, I'm Joel. I'm here to talk today about Next.js and Astro projects and automating your OpenGraph image generation. OpenGraph image is super important, one of those things that you might not know right away how to do it or what the importance of it is in your projects, but we're going to show you how to automate that so you can get all the benefits from it. Let's dive in to see what is actually OpenGraph and what is it all about. So OpenGraph, you might notice, has like an OG colon image. In your back end of your code, in your header, this is where this is going to sit. It's an OpenGraph standard for adding extra semantic data onto your web pages. And it basically tells like social sharing sites like Facebook, X/Twitter, LinkedIn, even Slack, a little bit more about your page so that when you share this link, this image comes up. So we're going to learn how to actually generate that and what it actually means for your site. The biggest thing is it's going to increase engagement on your site when it gets shared onto social platforms. So when someone shares your site or your page onto LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, that page is way more likely to get engagement when you can see an image that's on there, and you want that image to be representative of what that page is. So we'll see some techniques for generating that based on the content that's actually in the page, which is super cool. So what are OG tags anyway? Let's dig into what they actually mean. It started off actually, the first place this was actually used was on Facebook. And you have the OG image, which is probably the most important tag of all. So that's where you put the URL of your OpenGraph image. You can also set an alt tag onto here. I'm not going to be going too much into this, but I highly recommend doing this as well. So from an accessibility standpoint, it just describes what is in that OpenGraph image from a accessibility standpoint, so that someone who, maybe they're visually impaired or they're using a screen reader, they can actually get a description of what is in that image. This is super important. Has the title, which is kind of a repetition of what's in your head title, but it could be different. And you can set a description in there as well. So that's probably going to be the same as your meta description, but again, this could be a different value based on what you want to say as a description, different when it's shared socially. And then you can set the OG URL. This is an important one to set for a canonical URL to be set up. So there's more than these as well. There's lots of references where you can kind of see what are all the values for this. What can be a little confusing is that Twitter has all of these sort of like competing standard values that it sets up. So with the Twitter image, title and description, and you can set a Twitter card to say what kind of image to show on there. I would say these are kind of obsolete or at least deprecated now. So you can set these, but you don't have to. It will fall back to the OpenGraph or the OG values. So OpenGraph is really the standard that's been set up and kind of established. And if you're thinking of like social networks like LinkedIn and even Slack, which isn't really a social network, but when you share links on there, it will pull that in. And I'm sure lots of other platforms do this as well. So it's a really, really cool tool to kind of increase engagement and just make your web pages a lot richer when they're shared. So how do we actually generate this? So you can see I actually put some of the markup right there in this slide. So we're going to actually generate a meta property with the content that has the URL in it, and the property name is OG:image. You could just use a boring image URL, and we'll show actually an example of how to do that. And that's really useful, especially if you're paired with a site that is dynamically generated from a CMS. So, lots of sites out there, they're going to be, have content that's driven, and especially if it's from a headless CMS, you're going to have structured content in something like a blog post or a news release or an employee bio, whatever is the content of that page. If there's an image that's part of there, we can actually just use that as our meta in the meta tag for the OG image. But a little more interesting, we could auto-generate it based on the page title of what we're sharing. We could do this on the CDN, and I'm going to show how to do this with a tool called Cloudinary, which is a really cool digital asset management system and more. Or we can actually, there's a Vercel library we're going to dig into as well. You can actually generate this on the web server. Now, of these two patterns, I certainly think that this is something you should experiment with. I'm going to show you how to do it. I like the CDN pattern a lot better than generating it locally on your web server. A CDN is going to give you auto-formatted. It's going to be way more reliable. Well, my animations are all messed up here. It's going to be geo-scaled. If it's local, if you don't have a CDN, you can blow up your origin. So why would you do that? It's coming all over the place. So the CDN is going to be a lot faster just in general, because it's going to, the compute for that's going to actually generate that image is offloaded. And of course, it's going to be automatically geoscaled for you. So that's going to be served from that CDN. If you're generating it locally, ensure that your site is behind a CDN to do that, because otherwise you can blow up your origin. I've actually seen this happen in the wild, where all of the image people had used sort of these automatic image generations, not just for the social sharing image, but just for images in general, the auto-formatted images on their site. They weren't being cached in the CDN, and it caused huge problems, really big cloud bills, because if your origin blows up, then you actually pay for it to get scaled out, and it's just not a good thing. So on the CDN side of things, with like these purple buttons, they're going to automatically give you like a WebP or AVIF format, or like whatever format your browser can handle. So that's really good and high quality. It's going to be globally distributed, also really cool. On the flip side, local compute is always something that we want to eliminate if possible and do less of. Obviously, there's a balance there between what's going to be computed on the CDN and locally, but I highly recommend the idea of computing this on the CDN. Local can have unintended consequences. So I'm going to show you how to do both things, but really, if you can use a tool like Cloudinary, I highly recommend it. Even if you're not using Cloudinary for the rest of your site, like we're not in the sites that I'm going to be showing you, but we do use Cloudinary just for the social share images, because it's a really cool way of doing it, and it means that it's just taken care of, and you don't have to worry about it. Here's an example of if you're testing out your site later, you can go to Meta or Facebook's, it's called the debugger, the OpenGraph debugger. So what I've done is I pasted in a URL from our doc site here, from the agilitycms.com doc site, and pasted in, just a random page, and just clicked on the debug. And what's cool is you can, if it hasn't been scraped by Facebook, you can scrape it again. But then it's going to show you all the different recommendations that it would have. And it'll give you warnings if you don't have all of the OG values set, but you don't have to worry too much about that, because it will infer those properties. For instance, if you don't have the OG title set, it'll just use your header title. But the most important one is just checking out the actual image itself to see that it's coming through. So this is a good thing to do here. And you're going to see a really good preview of what that looks like. And you can see here, we've got using page management, Headless CMS - agility. So this is pulling the title from the documentation, from that actual article that's in the documentation site, and automatically generating image with that. So it doesn't sound that interesting, but it's super useful, because with this code, every single page on this site, I have not added an image to it. It's going to automatically generate this no matter what the title is. So this will work into the future for any page that can get shared from the documentation site. So that's really cool. So the sharing debugger is a really good way to kind of check that out and make sure that it is working. Just if you're using, so this is a screenshot from LinkedIn here. So what I did is just copy and pasted this link into a new LinkedIn post, and you should see a preview. I think I pasted the link in and just hit space, and you should see a preview of what that social sharing image is going to look like. If you're not seeing that, once you do some of these steps, then you probably have an issue. I'm going to get into some code in a little while where we're going to look at the markup and to see what you should be seeing in your markup, if this is indeed working or not. And as I was saying, this is a screenshot from Slack. So if you copy and paste a link into Slack, you can get these previews as well. So it's going to show you obviously your title, the description, the meta description, and it uses the OG image to figure that out. So it's a really cool way to give a lot more visual meaning to your web pages. So it's just a really nice thing. All right, so let's jump out of the slides here for a second, and let's actually start looking at some code. Cool. All right. So I've got Visual Studio Code up here, and actually this is the code of the Agility documentation site. So this is an older site. So for those of you who are using Next.js and you haven't moved to like the app router yet, this is for you. So this is a fairly standard site. It's actually not even using TypeScript. It's just using JavaScript. And we have this function in here this method called create sharing image. And I actually borrowed this from, hats off to Mateus Hernando Arello, and he shared this on a gist. So I found this, I don't know, a couple of years ago, when we were looking to add this functionality into the documentation site, found this cool gist that he had set up that basically tells you how to do this. So it's really nice, really way of basically creating a composite of image in Cloudinary. Now, if you've ever used Cloudinary before, it has the ability to basically extend the URL of an image or just adjust the URL to add a whole bunch of stuff in there. And one of the things you can do is add text into there and say, what's the font, what's the color, and how do, where do I want this to be displayed, and all of that sort of stuff. So in this case, I want to have a 1600 by 900 image. I'm going to fill it, crop fill on an automatic quality, automatic format, which is really important. So that's like, it'll generate that WebP or AVIF image like we said before, and the quality is just going to adjust that to probably somewhere around the 60%, 70% quality. So it's you can't tell visually that it's been sort of transcoded down, but it still looks really good. And then I'm going to take, so we're passing in some text into this. So that's the title that we're going to pass in. And what it's going to do is it's going to use Muley font of 96 point, put it in the center. Okay, so that's like this text portion here. And we encode this, so we have to URL encode this because it's going to actually get into the text. And I actually figured out we got to replace, if we have %2c in there, we got to replace that with this. I can't remember exactly what %2c is, but this is some trial and error with some different titles that I was testing on. So hopefully with your content, you don't have to do too much of this. And then I've hard-coded some stuff in here just based on where my Cloudinary stuff is. So let's jump to my browser for a second and we'll just actually look at this in my Cloudinary media. So what I've done is I uploaded 2 PNGs, one for our main site and one for the documentation site, and then just grab this. So the public ID of this it's in the docs folder and its ID is Agility OG docs. So you can see here, this is the public ID of the image that I'm using as my background. That's the base of what's going to be used here. And the rest of all these transformations are going to be joined up in front of that. So we have the base URL, we have the image transformations, which are here. We have our text transformations, which are all here in this little object. They all get appended together to create the full URL. So let's actually run this and see what we get, okay? So I'm just gonna run this locally. Let's open it up in the browser over here. So this is gonna be localhost 3000. All right, so we'll see just like the base URLs that are here. And let's just go into something that's like a normal, we have, this is under a subfolder /docs, excuse me for a second. /docs, so let's go to the owners and admin. Let's go to something interesting. Let's go to the developer section. That's always the most fun. Let's go to developing with agility. Cool. All right, so I'm not really interested too much in what's on this page, but really what's behind this page. So let's inspect this now. And I'm going to actually, let's just resize this a little bit. And I'm going to search inside here for OG:image. And you can see we've definitely output this here. And you can see we've got this, let's actually open it up in a new tab here. So you got res.cloudinary, so it's in Cloudinary, it's in, you've got all of this text translations, all this sort of stuff that's been put in there. Here's the text, and there's the actual image that's on the background. So, you're never gonna sort of like try to remember all of that stuff, but it's really cool is it automatically just handles it and makes it look great for you. So as long as you can create the background image, which isn't too hard, upload that into Cloudinary to where you need it to be, and remember where the ID of that image, what that is, and you can get that from the metadata of the image, I believe, or actually just opening it. Yeah, well, they change this all the time. But I think I can open this, copy the URL. Here we go, and we can just do copy the original URL, I believe. If we look at the original URL, you can see it always ends with the public ID /docs/OG-docs. So that's how we figured out what the URL was for this. To figure out, how to start compositing things onto there. You can actually use, there's tons of tools and tons of documentations on how to do transformations, which they have a whole section in their tool to do these, okay? So that's probably the hardest way to do these transformations, but it's really nice. So this method called create sharing image, we just, basically this is in we have like a component here that's doing all the header SEO. What we do is we come down through here and say, hey, look, we've got we're just creating a variable called the OG image. If we didn't already have an OG image pulled in from somewhere else, like passed into this component, It could be passed in by some data. Like I said, if we already had an image that was there, but 99% of the time in this site, this is going to be basically null gets passed in for this. So we're going to actually create this sharing image based on the title of the page, and then just basically jam that into our OG image right there. And we also are using it for our Twitter image as well. We're setting the Twitter card to be summary large image, which is Twitter speak for we want this to be show the big image side of this. And I'm not even sure this is even needed anymore. Twitter's site. This is an older value that you used to have to put this on there. I can't remember if you still do. I don't think you do. For if you're sharing stuff on Twitter, which is called X now, but I don't think that's actually required anymore. So these Twitter values are sort of obsolete and deprecated now. So as long as you have the OG image, you're good to go. Let's look at, so this is in Next.js. I think this is Next.js 10, so it's a little bit older. It's using the pages router, and it's not using the sort of new Next.js stuff that's going on. But the cool thing is generating this like OG image property is done in Cloudinary, and that's where that code is. I'm actually going to, if you go into the GitHub, I'm actually going to just jump right there right now. For agility, we can actually find this. So let's jump into agility, and I'm pretty sure the documentation site is going to have all of that stuff in there. Let me just grab that in another tab. 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, and I'll grab that full link for you and share that so you can see it. So of the repo. So here's the agility documentation site right here. So if you want to go to this site, I'll share it in the chat too. This is where all that code is. So if you go into here under pages, I think it's actually under components, common, and I believe it's under like head SEO right in there. So this is where we're calling this create sharing image. Okay. So that's all the source code for that. Pretty straightforward. So if you're using Next.js 10, that's for you. If you're on a newer version of Next.js, let's dig into how that might work. So this is the actual Agility CMS, our main site, not the documentation site. So everything that's before the /docs, and it's using the app router, which is a slightly different way of generating the header. You basically export a function called generate metadata. Okay. So what we've done is this is entirely data-driven site driven by content coming from the Headless CMS, which is agility in this case. So we have this function called resolve agility metadata, and it's doing a bunch of stuff because in this site, there's a lot of different kinds of content. Let's just look at a few of them so you can get an idea of, if you're actually working with content that's similar to this, how it might work for you. Okay, so I believe this has started up. So let's actually just go back to localhost 3000 here. Oh, it's already running. Cool. So we're just actually loaded up. Cool. So if we're in something like in the resources section, there's like a blog, right? So if I'm on one of these blog posts, then they actually have images already. And so what we wanted to do in this case is use that image as the OG image. So let's just double check to see if that's actually working and see if that's actually coming through. So if I check out the OG image, I can see here, let's just open this in a new URL for us. In a new tab, we can see that that's just being pulled through, and it's being format equals auto with equals 1200. This is just coming from like the agility CDN actually. So it's not doing anything special. It is cool though that it is pulling from content, which is something that when I'm trying to describe to developers how to do this, oftentimes they'll get kind of caught up on what's going on there. So let's take a quick peek at what's going on with that. So agility has this idea of a dynamic page item is basically the page, the content item that's used to render this page. And all we do is we check to say, hey, do we have a post image on there? And if we do, use that as the OG, as an OG image, and we actually add the alt onto that too, so it'll create the alt. So that's pretty simple. But if we don't have any of those images on there, what can we do? So this actually has differences. So it looks for different, like it could be a blog post, it could be a resource, all the different kinds of potential like actual dynamic content that's on there. But if there's none of those are actually happening, let's actually look at how we can generate the OG image. So I think that's, if I just scroll down here, I believe we have this create sharing image. So if we haven't already generated an OG image based on, it's a blog post or it's something else, we're just on a regular page that's throughout the site. It doesn't have a specific image already designated as the OG image. We're just gonna create one. And this is going to use almost the exact same function as we had before. So this looks really familiar, right? Because, and again, thanks to Mateus Arellano for generating this. We use the exact same thing to generate that image. So it's almost exactly the same logic. I'm not going to walk through it again, literally copy and paste it from the other site. So that means that if we're on a page, let's just go to like just a, I don't know, regular page. This doesn't have a piece of content on it that's special. We look at the OG image again. Let's find that. And we can see here, it is coming from Cloudinary and it's generated based on the page title, okay? And you can see how it automatically wraps, and we could be doing a lot more with it. We could be doing a whole bunch of other things, but this is super basic and clean. And it means that if this gets shared, obviously we're gonna still see a nice image that's branded and has all that in there, which is really cool. So that's how we do that in Next.js 13. Now, one of the things when I was in the slideshow that we had, actually, I'll bring up the repository for this site as well, in case you want to see that. So that's because this is also we open source this website. So agility website, let me just find that for you as well. So this repo right here, and it has all of this Next.js code in it as well. So there's a ton of Next.js 14, so it's pretty nice. Uses all kinds of cool technology in there to generate all this sort of stuff. And I'm pretty sure if you look under the lib folder, that's where that create sharing image is going to be. All right. Now, haven't actually rolled this one out, but I did want to show a really cool way of generating images dynamically, literally on your web server, okay, in your origin. And so there's this Next/OG image response that you can do. This is super cool. And this is a really basic demonstration of this, but say I had this string that I wanted to show from maybe my page title. I'm not passing that into this function. This is implemented as its own route, a route called OG. So this is passing in a hello friends with a little waving emoji there. But then what we do, notice this is a route with a TSX, which is not normal for a route. Normally a route is just TS, but this actually has a React component in it. It is just a div. And I'm fairly certain we have to style that div like with hard-coded, like these actual style tags. However, that's still a lot easier than a lot of other image manipulation libraries. Like there's tons like Image Sharp and other libraries you could use. This is a really nice way of kind of wrapping that up and generating an image that's 1200 by 630 and putting this right in the middle using CSS. So there's a whole lot of documentation on this about how to do this stuff, but let's just actually see what this looks like. So if we come into here, we go to /API/OG and check it out. This is what this image would look like. So we could set this image, so /API/OG as our OG image, and obviously probably would want to pass the text in there. Text equals the text. We would probably want to do that of our title. I'm not going to go too deeply into that. I still don't love this, okay? Because of the fact that this is generating on my web server. And in a lot of Next.js installations that I've seen, people don't have caching set up right. And normally it's not that big a deal because, yeah, you're just generating the text of your web pages. When you start generating a lot of images, that's a lot heavier of a task for your web server to do to generate that image. So I still really recommend looking at something like Cloudinary, but this is an alternative if Cloudinary is not an option for you. And by the way, even with Agility site, we're still on Cloudinary's like very low end plan, and it's not expensive. We're not using Cloudinary for all of our images. It's only for a few, but it still works really, really well. Okay. Now that's Next.js. Let's look at Astro. So now we're looking at my actual personal website, which is built on Astro. It's a super basic site. Let's shut this one down. Okay, now let's just run Astro here. Okay, I really like Astro in addition to Next.js. Next.js has all kinds of cool stuff, but I would say it's kind of getting a bit bloaty at doing maybe too many things for too many people, whereas Astro is a little simpler, I believe, for now. It basically allows you to do your own things without having to jump through a bunch of weird hoops. Like that whole export of generating the metadata is a way, I think, to make it easier to generate metadata, but it was not intuitive for me to learn. Whereas Astro is very intuitive from more of a web standards point of view for the most part. There's still some things in Astro that are a little weird to me. But let's look at how we can actually output an OpenGraph image from there and generate it and sort of jack that into the markup. So in my layout, this is generated from content that's in Agility, coming from a Headless CMS. It could be coming from any CMS, probably Headless, because traditional CMSs don't give you as much opportunity to work with the code in a low-level way like this. So a Headless CMS is highly recommended for this kind of work. But you can see here we have a variable for OG image URL. This is in the main layout that we're using. I have my Cloudinary cloud name. Pulling from, this is case, I didn't hard code it, so it's pulling from environment variable. And if we have a dynamic page item, again, I'm still going to use that. So I think this site does have blog posts on it, but we got a little smarter on this one, so we're doing some interesting stuff. And I'm going to show you that in a second. But most of the time, if we just have an image field, then what we're going to do is use that image for that. Otherwise, we're going to fall back and automatically create the sharing image with the exact same logic that we had before. Okay, so it's really using almost the same backend logic, because this is just Node right now, right? So this is, again, that same create sharing image that we had before. It's using a different cloud name, but the same and a different image here. So this is obviously this is my personal Cloudinary account now that I've used for that. I'm pretty sure I'm on the free account for this one with a different image that's in there. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So let's go to fiction page. Okay, so oops, didn't mean to do that one. We're just gonna go to here, click into here and search for OG image. And pretty sure that's gonna be there. Here we go. All right, so let's actually just take a look at that now. So it's gonna pull from here. This is a very super basic image. So I created this with a little mini headshot on there. And it's just gonna put, the page title on there. So we already saw that before, not that cool. But interestingly enough, I wanted to do a little bit more with this part of the demo to say, well, what if we wanted to make it a little bit more like super interesting? So what if I had, so on a normal blog post, let's look at this one. This is just a regular blog post. We're gonna use this image as our OG image. So let's actually go find that OG image, and it's just a regular OG image. Oops, let's put it here. Okay, so it's just showing the image. It's not doing any overlay. But what if I wanted to combine a bunch of stuff and I actually had a Cloudinary image? So what I did is I actually added a Cloudinary field to, Agility has a Cloudinary app. So what I did is I hooked up my Cloudinary app and added a new field onto my blog post called Cloudinary image. So what I did is I put some logic in there to say, hey, if I have a Cloudinary image, use that instead for everything. So on this post using a CMS Maybe Better Developer, let's actually look at that post. So using a CMS Maybe a Better Developer, here's where that is. It's using the Cloudinary image that I set up. Let's look at the OG image on there real quick. So this one's going to be a lot more complex. Hopefully it works. Cool. All right, so we're doing a lot more here. We still have the title, but we actually superimposed an overlay of this image onto here, so we can do some, as I said, some really cool compositing things. You can do this with an external image as well, but I think it works a little easier with a local image. And it's on top of the same backdrop. Let's look at that code as the last little bit of code. I just enough time to show that here. I got a couple of minutes. So back to my Astro layout, and let's back up a little bit. So if I do have a dynamic page item, so if I have an item from the posts list, so this page is basically built from a blog post, right? Let's go grab that, and it has a field on it called Cloudinary image, which is actually a JSON field. So let's actually pull that apart, and we're going to call create composite sharing image. This is a new method here now. We're going to pass in that Cloudinary image, pass that in there, and also pass in the overlay text that we want to get from the title of this page. So let's jump into there and see what we're doing. Now we're using all of this Cloudinary, the actual SDKs that they have, which are super cool. They allow you to do a lot more stuff, and it's a lot more structured than the kind of hard-coded way we were doing it with the create sharing image earlier. Now this is nice because it's like super low tech, and I know exactly the URL that I'm getting. This one took me a little bit longer to put together because I had to kind of dig into a lot of there's some real syntactic sugar here that's going on, but it's a little more structured. And I think if you really want to do some hardcore stuff with Cloudinary, this is the way to go. I saved the best for last. So what I do is I basically start off creating a Cloudinary image based on my background. So that's the hard-coded background. I could probably put that in an environment variable or something, but that's the main background I'm going to use for the underlay of this. And then I add an overlay of my text. So I pass in the text that I got from my image. It's gonna the style is gonna be font is Muley, size 60, bold weight, color white. The position is going to be this gravity. So the idea is really interesting. The idea of gravity and a compass for direction, which is kind of weird, but I guess it works. As opposed to left, right, and top, bottom, you have north, east, south, west. And I offset this to kind of pull it up, down 50 pixels. So that's the text overlay. And then I also do the an image overlay. So we can do the source of this overlay is going to be an image, and I pass in the public ID of that image background. So just to show you what that is, that's this image here. I transform it to 500 by 1200. So it's like, this is the size, 500 by 1200. I do rounded corners by 60 to make it a little bit nicer looking. And then we position that in the center with minus 50. So kind of pull it down, pull it up 50 pixels to get it so it doesn't overlay with my beautiful headshot down here. So that's all that's happening here. And then we just call to URL. So it's doing 2 levels of overlays on there. Now, what's interesting is I could stack a whole bunch more things onto this if I wanted to do that, or use any kind of layout tool. So it's almost like if you've ever used Canva or these other layered image generating tools, this is a programmatic way to achieve that, and it's really cool. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. That's how you do all these OG images, and it works great. Hope you learned a lot.
Thanks, Joel. Well, it's good to have you here. That was a really good presentation. Sorry. Of course, I did not mute my video here. Apologies, Joel. You know, I've only done this like 1,000 times already. I should be better at this. Okay, so that was a really great presentation. I learned a ton. I this, to me, it's one of those things like nobody really wants to generate these on a per page basis. So like having something like this to automatically generate them is really incredibly useful. So I'm curious. So you showed us a lot of code. Are you server rendering most of these images like on the fly, or are you statically rendering them on your blog, or how are you handling that? Because I mean, I know you talked a little bit about how like this can actually eat up lots of resources if you're generating it constantly.
Yeah. So what's great about the logic I showed is that all you're generating at runtime is the string of the URL. And until somebody actually grabs that, it doesn't do anything, right? And so since we're using Cloudinary is doing all the heavy lifting themselves. So they do all the translations. And actually for my personal site, it's a free Cloudinary account that I'm using because they have a really generous free offering. So that works really well for us. And for the agility websites, like I showed like our corporate website and our documentation site. Even then, like we don't pay Cloudinary very much money for that because we like how often do your social images actually get pulled out? Not that often. And then they feel like LinkedIn or whatever, wherever they get shared, those get cached on those platforms as well. So it actually is a nice, like very low actual stuff, and it all happens on their servers, not ours.
Okay, so it's effectively you're largely relying on whatever caching is built into their servers, basically.
Yeah.
Nice.
So the way
Okay.
Cloudinary, yeah, the first time you have like one of those really complex URLs, it does all those translations and figures it all out, and then it serves it from their CDN. So they have all that figured out.
Nice. Yeah, that is the benefit of using something like that as opposed to like, writing it out yourself and writing your own transformations.
Oh, yeah.
I will say as a side note, you talked about caching. Some of the services, LinkedIn caches seemingly forever because I'll use like redirects for the URLs for these events, and a year later, 2 years later, it's still using the same image from the first time I ran it on LinkedIn. It's a pain in the butt, but anyway, so
Yeah.
just something to be aware of.
They ignore any cache control parameters that you set on it. They just do their own thing.
Exactly. So, and let me do you have? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about Astro and about Next.js. I mean, is there any preference to how each handles? Do you obviously you like Astro for your personal site, but like, is there any key differences that you think should be pointed out? Anything you like better or worse between the two frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love that there's a special method in Next.js now just to generate all of your like your meta tags and stuff like that and your OG images and all that. It does give you a nicely strongly typed way of doing it. So I understand that that could be a good thing. Um, but from the other side of it, it's like Astro is just like, hey, you understand web standards, you understand the kind of markup you want to generate it yourself. I like that. And I think that the overall web development world will actually shift more towards that sort of methodology and sort of thought process. Certainly with stuff like Remix as well. It's like based more on web standards than on
Mm.
this framework's decision of what the standards was. As I saw that happen with .NET over the years as well. .NET got more and more and more complicated. They ended up doing a reset into version like 5 or something, and then simplified it again. So we may see that with Next.js, but certainly with Astro, it just seems easier and simpler.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just redid a whole site in Astro, and I gotta say, they're like the image tooling is really nicely done. And like once I was done, and not just for OG images, just like even for all your resized images and everything was super slick. So I was really happy with it. Um, so the OG image method you showed in Next.js, was that like basically you style it takes whatever is represented in HTML and converts that to an OG image? It looked like you just did a div with some styling. So whatever's
Yeah.
inside this rendered HTML becomes your image.
Yeah, that's that image response class that we saw in the chat. So it's really cool because it essentially you're in a route, like an API
Mm,
route, but you name that route TSX as opposed to
mm,
.t, which you normally would. And that allows you to essentially put a React element in there. And what it does is I don't know how it does it, but it renders that React element as an image for you and gives you all the styling that that had. So it works really, really well. That's a Next.js specific thing. And I do believe that does work outside of the Vercel environment. I don't know if it works everywhere. When you self-host, I haven't tested it in all the different places, but it is a really cool option that does render on your origin server though, so you want to make sure that that gets cached properly for sure.
yeah, nice. And you know, it is interesting to me how with so many of these frameworks now, it's like, oh, it's got this new cool feature, but where does it work everywhere? And it often doesn't. Um, you know, it's good. I'm glad to see innovation. At the same time, I just look back on the days when I could just create something and run it wherever I wanted to. Um, I look back on those fondly.
Yeah, it's like
um, yeah.
you want it to be accessible from a hosting point of view.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is tough to kind of, which is I think why so many people just like if I'm on Next, I'm just going to go Vercel. It's easier. I know it all works. But yeah, cool. Well, this was really great. I think it's super useful. Everything you showed, like I think is really useful. I know I've seen people even go like super creative where they make really slick looking OG images using all these same tools. So I think if you're maybe a better designer than you and I, Joel, not to critique your design skills, but I know mine are
Well,
pretty bad.
it's a low bar for me, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, if I think somebody with some skills could probably make that or those OG images look incredible. So,
Yeah.
thanks, Joel. I really, really appreciate the talk. Thanks for coming out.
All right, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.